Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. This episode is brought to you by The Wellness Paradigm, a holistic health coaching company shifting the way that women understand and heal their bodies. Through bioenergetic testing, functional lab testing, and nutrition, we uncover what traditional approaches often overlook so you can stop guessing, start healing, and finally feel like yourself again. No more one size fits all protocols, just real answers, deep rooted healing, and the clarity and confidence you deserve to feel incredible. It's time to shift the paradigm of women's health. Now, on to the show. And good morning, Lauren.
Good morning, Shannon. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited you're here and we're gonna have a great conversation today. We're very aligned on many different things and we'll kind of jam
Yes.
on this, but Lauren is a certified yoga therapist. She's an integrative health coach and she really specializes in chronic pain, menstrual cycle wellness, and mental health. And before we started recording, we were talking about this a little bit on how important it is to address things from a physical perspective, an emotional perspective, but also just really looking at the body and the gut and, you know, understanding a role that this plays in literally everything that we do, including things like chronic pain, which is, I'm sure you've seen just this huge influx of in the last few years. And
Yes.
as somebody who has dealt with chronic pain for 20 years of her life, undiagnosed with, autoimmune arthritis, it's like this needs to get talked about more from this whole body perspective. So, Lauren, give us a little bit of insight on what got you into really integrating all of these different beautiful modalities together.
Yeah. So I like to tell people that this path kind of found me.
Mm.
I was a sick kid. I was born with a congenital heart defect, and I had all sorts of health issues as a child, from GI issues. I had my gallbladder taken out when I was 7 years old,
Wow.
and dealt with all sorts of GI pain pretty regularly up through my 20s. And then when I was a preteen and I got my period for the first time, I very quickly realized that I had more pain than others. Um, and so it took me 15 years, but I did eventually get diagnosed with endometriosis and adenomyosis. And that was a process. Like I said, 15 years to get a diagnosis, and there was a lot of suffering in between and a lot of gaslighting by different medical professionals. And so it was kind of because of my own health history and also that of my parents, who also have been called medical unicorns by their doctors, each of them separately. So because I was just so invested in understanding the body for self-preservation, right? In order to help myself and my family, I always was drawn to this path of holistic healing. I kind of knew that traditional medicine was not necessarily for me. And then after college, in college, I studied public health and was working as a case coordinator and research assistant in all of these different randomized control trials and interventional studies. And then I became more interested in traditional herbal medicine and global women's health. And those were the classes that really fascinated me and really drew my attention. So after college, I started to work at a functional medicine practice and then deepened my work in herbalism, clinical herbalism, did an apprenticeship in that. And the whole time I had been loving yoga. And, I started to do my first yoga teacher training. But it was really, I was at this particular integrative medicine practice in 2020 when COVID hit. And I had been used to seeing, I'd been there for about 6 years at that point, and I had been used to seeing people improve so dramatically from all of the protocols that they had been given up until that point, right? So I was the apothecary manager there. So I was helping people, educating them on how to use supplements and herbs and different enzymes and, even peptides, that sort of thing. And we did IV nutrient therapy and so many different things that helped people get better up until that point. And then all of a sudden, I was noticing so much nervous system dysregulation, and folks were just not improving in the ways that they had been before. And because I
Yeah.
had been teaching yoga at that time for about 4 years, I was like, I just want to teach people to breathe and
Uh,
pause and maybe meditate and, just like something to bring things down because I understood so deeply how much stress impacts your overall well-being. And so that's when I started to pursue not just my 300-hour yoga teacher certification, but yoga therapy as a modality. And so, really bringing all of those things in my background together to serve one on one clients, because it became so apparent to me at that time that there's this layer of the self that we are just starting to talk about and just beginning to emphasize. Prior to that, it was like someone would go to their doctor and they might mention, like, oh, you're stressed. And that was almost as a way to kind of push them off. Like, it's
mm.
just stress. But there was never any discussion about, okay, what can I actually do about stress? How can I actually address this in a way that's going to improve my health? And so that became kind of my mission.
Mm. Yes, I talk about that quite often with clients. It's so hard because it's like, I'm sure you get this too. Well, I'm never not going to be stressed. Okay. True, probably, but it's like how your body can become more resilient to that stress, so you stop getting all of these issues.
Absolutely, yes. I talk about this all the time. I actually just wrote a blog about this recently. Capacity expansion
Mm.
is something that I work with clients on because, yes, everyone has stress and you're always going to have stress, but we have tools, first of all, that we can use to actually lower our stress response. And there are ways that you can expand your capacity to handle stress and to hold stress that's not going to send you into a pain flare or a symptom flare that is worth pursuing because otherwise, every little, and I know because I've been there with
Mhm.
my own chronic health issues, every little thing can set you off when you're so sensitive in having more symptoms, more pain.
Mhm. Let's go down that path a little bit because I'm sure this is obviously, dependent person to person, and it's not quite as simple, but how does one raise their capacity for stress tolerance?
Mm. Well, for starters, I think it's important that people understand that's not where we start.
Mm.
And I think I see this all the time on social media, especially with practices, different breathing techniques or cold plunging, right? That is a level of stress. What's happening in your body with cold plunging is you're stressing your body out. And there is research on the benefits of cold shock proteins, but if you are not in the right nervous system state already, and you're already kind of in a fragile state with your health, you have chronic stress and chronic symptoms, maybe a trauma history, that's not the path for you right now, maybe ever. And so it's important to understand that capacity expansion is not where we start. The way in general that you would expand your capacity is kind of titrating doses of stress and regulating around that. But first, we need to learn how to regulate before we can expand our capacity. First, we need to understand, like, how can I bring myself back into, in psychology, it's like your window of tolerance. How can I bring myself back to baseline that is not completely getting thrown off when I have a conversation that feels triggering for my nervous system? And how can I continue breathing? So many people hold their breath in their daily life and they're not even aware of it. So I think we start with awareness of where we're at and honesty with ourselves, and then build some of these tools that can help our bodies practice coming back to center, coming back into our embodiment versus always being operating in the mind and overthinking and getting into these really negative thought patterns of like, oh, well, it's hopeless because I'm always going to have stress. So that's what I would say. We kind of have to start. There's a step before capacity expansion that we can't skip.
Yeah, I love that you said that because, doing so many podcast episodes, there's always a common theme. It's coming back to the body and, just learning how to regulate yourself a little bit. And I don't want to say it's the boring stuff, but it's the unsexy stuff that, like, it's not going to go viral on social media. You're not going to see it blasted like you are these other fancy tools, but it is arguably, yeah, some of the most important things that we do. And I actually just had a conversation with a client where I was telling her that it's like a muscle. Like you don't just get big
Mm.
biceps from doing, bicep curls twice a week for 1 week, right? It's like you have to constantly remind yourself when you do get triggered or something happens that you can pull back down, that you can, use your tools, to bring yourself a little bit more back into alignment. It's not, oh, I did my breath work, didn't work. Oh, I tuned into my body, it didn't work, right? I find that so much with my clients where it's like it's not necessarily that want that immediate fix, but if they tried it and it didn't work, they move on to what they think is the next best thing. Do you find that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think consistency is such an untapped tool that we have in our toolboxes, but I think that's the benefit really of working with a coach or a practitioner is they know the path forward because they've worked it with themselves, hopefully, and with so many other clients that they can help you remember why you're doing what you're doing. And I think when people are just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping something sticks because they see all of these tips on social media, that's when they're not having sustainable success because they're not trying things for long enough, or maybe they're trying the wrong things for themselves. So there's that lack of guidance, but there's also the lack of consistency. And I've totally been there myself where I'm like, that didn't work for me. I tried it for a week, or I tried it for 2 weeks, it didn't work for me. And nothing, if you've had an issue for 10 years, it's not going to shift in 2 weeks. That's just not how physiology works. So, really giving things due time to unfold in their benefits for you is so important. And I think that's really one of the huge benefits of working with a coach or a practitioner.
Oh man, this is like mirroring my conversation earlier with a client. It's so important to hear this, right? And working with a coach, I mean, it's so important because they also just understand your blind spots and like keep you on track where you're gonna wanna, I mean, I'm guilty of this, like bing, ding, 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 like next thing didn't work. Or for so many clients who are more sensitive or reactive, it almost like get into the spiral, like this trauma spiral, where it's like something happens, it brings them back to like, and they forget all of the progress they made. And,
Hmm.
and it's like reminding them, like, it's just a moment. The body is
Yeah.
can heal, right? Like, and just like finding those moments and that mirror to reflect back, like, hey, it's okay. Let's tweak this a little or let's not. Like, let's just, work through this. The body will learn how to work through this and we can move on, you know?
Yeah. And a lot of it, I mean, I don't work with protocols. Everything that I do with folks is really customized to them, to what I'm seeing in them in their um, maybe doshic makeup. I have Ayurveda as a part of my practice as a yoga therapist because it's kind of like if you think of acupuncture, the underpinning of that is traditional Chinese medicine. Same thing for yoga therapy with traditional Indian medicine or Ayurveda. So I might be looking at someone's constitution, like their doshic makeup and imbalances. I might be looking at their specific anatomy, right? What muscles are tight, what muscles are weak, what asymmetries exist and posture and everything else. But there's also so it's customized to them, and of course, if something is not right for them, if something causes pain or is a trigger, like I'm not going to continue down that path. But then
Mhm.
at the same time, there's something to be said for trusting the process. So
Yeah.
something might feel like it's moving really slowly. And oftentimes I have this conversation with clients all the time. Sometimes we have to move slowly to move actually faster in the long run. So many people want to see immediate results. They want to take a pill. They want to take, even if it's a supplement, they want to take a supplement and be like, I'm cured. And it just does not work like that. If you want to have actual sustainable healing, you need to give it the time that it deserves. And again, exactly like you said, that's not sexy. That's not what people want to hear. That's not what goes viral, but it's the truth.
Oh, yes. That is a daily conversation I have with people. It's hard. It is hard, particularly when you work with people with chronic pain,
Hmm.
because they wanted results last year.
Yes.
And it's hard to live like that. Again, I am speaking from experience. It's like who had tried everything, and it's like
Hmm.
finally invest, you take that next step, and when it doesn't work right away, it's like you start feeling like, well, nothing is going to work for me, right? And it's like this, for lack of better words, like trauma loop. It's like, well, I'm just the unicorn. I'm just helpless. Nothing. And
Yes.
then your brain
Yeah.
starts searching for other, other things, and honestly, it leads to burnout. Like you just get exhausted.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's part of the dysfunction too, right? A lot of clients I've seen, they never stick to one practitioner. They're like, this person was helping
Yep.
me, but then I switched to this person, and then I'm going here, and I see 10 different people, and they're looking so outside of themselves
Yeah.
when really one of the main issues is they don't feel at home, they don't feel safe in their own bodies. And so getting them to a place of regulation needs to be the first step, or they're going to continue to search outside of themselves for all of these answers. And like, yes, there are coaches and guides, right? That's what we do, but I cannot make the shifts that you need to make in your life to fix you. That's not my job. Like I don't see myself as someone who is just above you in the hierarchy and I am all knowing and a guru or what anything like that. I am very much like partnering with people to educate them on how their bodies work so that they can then do the work that needs to be done to get themselves to a place of more ease, more relief, more regulation, and then all of the things you can build from that, right? Feeling powerful and feeling peaceful and feeling joyful, all of those things. But we need to come to ourselves first and be able to sit with ourselves and not run away and try to dissociate because being in our bodies is painful. Because I have been there. I have spent many years just living in my head because being in my body hurt.
Mm, this is so important. It really is because I remember going through this journey and people would be like, get out of your head, in your body. I'm like, cool, sounds nice. How the hell do I do that?
Yeah.
Or I'm doing it, quotation, right? I wasn't really, right? So h- what would be some things if like you're somebody that overthinks, you're in your head a lot, right? Constantly go, 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 probably.
Right.
How do you train that body? Or what would be one of the first two or three steps to really bring yourself back into the body?
Mm. So, a couple different things are pretty foundational tools. One of those tools would be how we're breathing. It's one of the first things that I look at with my clients is how are you breathing? And so many people are either holding their breath, as I mentioned, and so many people are reverse breathing. So, what I mean by that, when you inhale, your breath anatomy, your diaphragm contracts and moves down in your torso. And your pelvic floor is also supposed to soften and move down a bit. And so your belly naturally expands a little as you inhale, or it should expand a little bit as you inhale. And then when you exhale, your belly deflates like a balloon a little bit. So it kind of moves back in. Your navel moves in toward your spine a little bit up toward your heart. And a lot of people are doing the opposite of that. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Oftentimes it's stress. So they'll be breathing mostly with their accessory muscles up in their chest and not with their diaphragm. The main muscle of breathing is supposed to be your diaphragm that sits below your lungs. But a lot of people are using, their pecs, their traps, and their shoulders go up every time they inhale. And then a lot of people that have chronic pain, especially pelvic pain, especially pain that's in your pelvis, low back, or it's like from something like endometriosis or adenomyosis, IBS, anything like that, they'll brace their abdomen and they'll brace in their pelvic floor. Hence why we get hypertonic or too much tension in the pelvic floor muscles. And so our bellies can't expand and our diaphragms don't have the space to move down when we inhale. And so instead, we'll pull the belly in as we inhale. It feels so unnatural to do it. I'm trying to do it right now. And then as we exhale, the belly releases. But the problem with that is that the lower parts of our lungs are innervated with mostly our vagus nerve, which is the nerve that governs the parasympathetic response or rest and digest. So it's what's putting the brakes on your stress response. And if we never breathe down into those lower parts of our lungs, then we're never fully accessing that. And then the upper part of our lungs is really innervated with sympathetic nervous system fibers, nerve fibers. And so we're literally, if you breathe quickly into your chest and start hyperventilating, you will trigger a stress response. And so one of the first things that I do, rather than fighting physiology, is teach people how to breathe appropriately and practice breathing with them. And there are so many different ways that we can do that, not just directing them, okay, well, just let your belly expand, because sometimes that mind to muscle connection is not there, right? We need to actually facilitate that with different movements or different breathing techniques that can make that easier. So breath would be kind of one of the first entry points for folks, but then also working with interoception. So the sensation of your, sensing your internal body. So can you feel your feet on the ground?
Mhm.
Can you, take a moment right now to feel where are your shoulders? Can you soften them down away from your ears? Is there something that you can do to be even 1% more comfortable in this moment? So starting to prompt people in that way to come back to the body in a really practical sense of just notice how you're sitting right now. What's your posture like? Can you find a place of more ease with whatever shape you're in? And sometimes, there are things that are jumping in the way of that because pain is super multifaceted. Of course, there can be inflammation and all sorts of other things going on, but the state of your nervous system really feeds into it's the pain fear cycle. So if you are in a state of chronic stress, if you have trauma, all of those things are going to impact how loud your pain signals are and how strong they are. So, getting ourselves back into our body and teaching ourselves how to breathe properly would be step one.
Yeah, I love that. Important. It's like when you're driving, notice like how tense your jaw is,
Yeah,
how your shoulders are up by your ears. Um,
right.
when I used to teach in person, I'd always say, relax your mouth. Like,
Relax
you
your
know,
mouth. Yeah, relax. Notice if there's anywhere that you're clenching. I teach regular yoga classes as well as working one-on-one with clients as a yoga therapist. And so often I'll cue folks if we're in a particularly challenging hold. I'll say, notice if there's anywhere that you're holding this pose where you don't need to be. Can you soften through your jaw? Can you relax your eyebrows? Can you soften your belly or your shoulders? There's so many things that we don't realize we reflexively tense up when things start to feel challenging. And so starting to bring just awareness to that is so important.
you brought something up as far as, teaching yoga and yoga therapy. And can you describe a little bit of the difference between yoga therapy versus just traditional yoga classes?
Totally. Yeah. So teaching a traditional yoga class, of course, anyone is coming in from the general population, and um, oftentimes those classes can be quite large, right? So there's not a whole lot of individual attention that I can give to everyone in the room. So, I can go over and I can cue to make sure that people are not endangering themselves. I can make some, with consent, maybe some hands-on adjustments and assists to help people get into a shape that is going to feel better in their bodies. But there's only so much that I can do in a yoga class that's just for everyone. Yoga therapy is I see it as a bridge between healthcare and yoga. And so yoga therapy is a one-on-one modality. I'm working with just the individual in front of me. And I'm really viewing that person in front of me through basically two different lenses. One I mentioned before is from the lens of Ayurveda, thinking of them, their doshic makeup, what's being presented to me as far as their symptoms. And then I'm also looking at them through the lens of what's known as the koshas in yoga philosophy. There are 5 of them. They're considered these like layers of the self. And so the first layer is the physical body, and I'll do a physical assessment and look at muscles that are a little weak from one side to the other. Have limited range of motion. I'll move their joints through ranges of motion and see, oh, there's some restriction here. So I'll work with the physical body in that way. Of course, I bring in health coaching as well. So also looking at things like diet and what their supplement routine is, what are they taking for prescriptions? Sometimes there are contraindications. You'd be surprised how often I uncover that.
Mhm.
Um, Looking at the physical body in that way, though, and looking at their sleep and stress and all of those things. But then the next layer is the energetic body. That's the layer that you've had interaction with anytime you've had something like acupuncture done. And I really like to think of that as kind of adjacent to the nervous system, right? It's the energy of the body. We can interact with it with the breath, with different practices like prana nidra. But it's such an important foundational part of who we are and how our bodies operate. And so few people are in touch with that because we're just so busy and it's hard to be still and quiet long enough to notice that part of ourselves, that layer of the self. And then we look at also the next two layers, the conscious mind, and then the what's known as the wisdom body, which is kind of like the subconscious, our belief system, our impressions of past actions is one way that it's put in yoga, and that could include things like trauma. And so that layer of the self is where all of these self beliefs come up, whether they are helpful or unhelpful, um, all of the things that we have gone through in the past and how they inform how we move about the world and what we think. And then the last layer is the Anandamaya Kosha. That's the bliss body. It's like our connection to something greater than ourselves. And so that could be your conception of God. That could be the creative force of the universe, source, whatever you want to call it. That might be just nature, Mother Nature, or your community, just something greater than yourself, your connection to that. Maybe it's your purpose. But that is also such an important part of our overall well being. And all of those layers of the self are mirrors of the other. So when there's dysfunction in one layer, that is going to show up in every other layer as well. And when we work on finding balance in one layer, the same is also true. So it's like this beautiful ripple effect that can happen. When we work on the physical body, so much can change in the mind, and so much can change in the energy, and so much can change in that more spiritual sense of ourselves as well. So it's super holistic. It's very, very personalized. I will, see folks for their first session that's 90 minutes long, and then our follow-ups are 60 minutes. And that's the first follow-up is when I teach them their individualized practice. I give them different things to work with, lifestyle medicine wise, and really kind of continue to co-create the process for them and constant conversation about how is this feeling for you? What are you experiencing? I'm just always asking, like, how does this feel in your body? And cueing, for my own information so that I can shift things if needed, but also to cue that awareness continuously. Like, how does this feel in my body? I'm not just viewing you as this person that is going to fix me. I'm in this constant conversation and inquiry with myself as well.
Yeah, I love that. Just not looking to somebody else to be like your savior. That's tough.
Yeah.
Especially as coaches, because we kind of we want to be that, we want to heal people, but it people heal themselves. We're just guides.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
you tapped on the emotional, physical. Is there anything else that you find is really effective for clients that are really struggling with um, pain management, who have maybe, let's say they've tried stretching, even let's say yoga therapy, um, maybe they're taking the turmeric, um, which I will tell you as somebody who used to take like 6 of them a day and it did nothing. It can be helpful, but it's not the end all be all. Is there anything else that you would suggest or kind of guide somebody if they want another tool in their tool belt?
Yeah. So one of so many, and again, it's super personalized, so it's hard to speak to everyone and say this is the way, because that's not usually how it works. But one of the things that I do with clients is something called somatic pain reprocessing therapy. And so that's as part of like the work that I do with them in addition to yoga therapy and health coaching. And it's really just pain. I like to tell clients to think of as an acronym of pay attention inside now. So it's asking you to notice it for whatever reason. It's asking you to pay attention to it and sit with it. And oftentimes, because pain draws attention so well, people are like, yeah, I'm always aware of this pain, which is true. But being aware of the pain and having all of these stories about the pain, about, oh, this means that X, Y, and Z condition is flaring, or I've injured myself. Oh, I tweaked my back. My vacation's going to be ruined. All of these thought spirals that happen are actually neuroscientifically putting us in more pain. It's making your pain signals louder and last for longer. And so if we can sit with the pain and really allow our minds to pay attention to where that pain is, exactly what does it feel like? What does the sensation feel like? Without judgment, without all of those stories that we layer on top of it over time, and reminding ourselves that it's safe to feel those sensations. It's safe to feel this. It's not a symptom. It doesn't necessarily mean that anything has gotten worse, that there's damage in my body, because that's true, right? There's all these studies done, especially with lower back pain, that what findings on an MRI do not translate to pain levels. Same thing with endometriosis, and I've talked about this a lot before because that's kind of, was my original passion for my own self. The level of disease that you have does not translate to the level of pain that you're in. So something else is going on there. And what's going on there is your nervous system at work and also your levels of inflammation. So working with awareness, having a little bit of detachment in terms of our emotional response and our mental response to the pain. And then also, as I mentioned, looking at inflammation, so many different sources of inflammation. A huge one that I see all of the time is insulin resistance. And folks will I'll ask for people's recent lab work, and I'm sure you've seen this all the time. Be like, all right, let's see what your recent A1C was. And I'm like, oh, they didn't mention to you that you're pre-diabetic? Or, they'd be like, oh, well, just like wait and see. I'm like, wait and see for what? If we continue on this path, you're going to become diabetic. And there's just no mention of interventions or what they can do to prevent that from getting worse. But insulin resistance is inflammatory. So that's just one example of, something that we can work on. And sometimes that physical layer is the easiest layer for people to access to. I will say that when you haven't had a lot of practice working with the energy, working with the breath, it can feel the easiest to just like, let's talk about the body, because we're used to going to the doctor. We're used to talking about medications and what we can do, diet, what we can do in that realm. Sometimes that's just the easiest path to getting just a little bit of relief. And I've seen that all the time with people that have things like frozen shoulder, right? Frozen shoulder, you could stretch that all you want, but if the causative factor for your frozen shoulder is insulin resistance, is elevated blood sugar for an extended period of time, then you're not going to see a whole lot of improvement until you get that under control. So, I feel like that wasn't a solid answer to what everyone should be doing, but just some
Wow.
things that they can look at.
No, I love that. And this is a really important conversation we could probably jam on for another hour, but it is not just one thing, it's
Mm,
it's so important to look at the physical. Yes, you want to be stretching and strengthening and working out, right? All those things are going to help, but you have to look at the metabolic health too, and not just labs, because they're going to tell you when dysfunction's happening, not why.
yep.
Looking at these deep inflammatory patterns that are happening, which hands down, I mean, when I worked on my gut health, within 6 weeks, I got off walking with a cane. Like it is so powerful. And I was doing
Mhm.
all the physical. And then once you've done that and you know there's a level deeper, I feel like is when people get into the energetic side. You know,
Absolutely. Yeah.
maybe not, but that's how I got into bioresonance too, right? And it's like you understand there is a level deeper that you could go and it's not going to be stretched out, it's not going to be supplemented out. It's like addressing this, which if you started there, arguably the other things would work better, but everybody's on their own path, right? But I love this integration of all three. So thank you for bringing some awareness to that and some knowledge.
Of
And I would
course.
love for people to connect a little bit more with you, your work. Where can they find you to connect with you?
Yeah, you can find my website is thevibrantbody.co. No M at the end there. That's a common mistake. You can find me on Instagram also at The Vibrant Body or Facebook under the same name. And yeah, feel free to send me a message. I do offer free first consults so that we can kind of get a sense of if I am able to support you and help you and if we would be a good fit for working together one on one. And I also actually have a course that I just launched recently that sets up kind of those three pillars I mentioned, which is the nervous system, but also how we move, how we start to move in a way that feels nervous system safe to start rehabbing chronic pain and then inflammation. So that's called Pain Relief Foundations. I'm super excited about it. I've had some really awesome feedback so far, and that's a great way to get a sense of my work and get started building your own solid foundation for pain relief without, having to work with me one-on-one or pay the prices for one-on-one work.
Yeah, yeah. I will link her website, social media, and then that mini course down in the show notes. You guys can check it out. And Lauren, thank you so much for your time and being here. And if you guys found this helpful and you know that somebody else is dealing with this too, please share this episode with them so that they can, hopefully be on their way to wellness too. So thank you, Lauren. Thank you, listeners, for being here, and we'll catch you on the next show.
Thank you, Shannon.